dear learners. I welcome you once again to this MOOC on population and society. In the previous modules of this week, we had discussed the different indices that are used to measure the variables of population dynamics or demographic studies, that is birth and fertility, mortality and migration. In these modules, we had detail on the direct methods of estimating population growth and change. Today, we will be discussing Module 12, wherein our focus will shift towards exploring the indirect approaches for estimating the demographic indicators. The main objective of this module is to introduce you to the concept of indirect estimating. Here, we will also try to deduce the need for such indirect measures and discuss in detail what it seeks to offer. Further, we will take a look into the different ways in which indirect methods are implemented. So then after that, we'll move on to the main tools used for indirect estimation. And finally, we will discuss the limitations of applying indirect estimation. So now, let us start this module by understanding what indirect estimation in demographic research means. So what is indirect estimation? Demographic estimation consists of the attempts to measure values of basic demographic parameters such as the birth rate, death rate, or the level of total fertility. These basic parameters indicate the way in which a population will evolve in terms of size and age structure over time. The term indirect is used to denote some of the techniques used in demographic estimation that produce estimates of a certain parameter on the basis of information that is only indirectly related to its value. The most well-known example is estimating the likelihood of dying before the age of 2 by using the percentage of dead children among all the other children ever carried by women in the age of 20 to 24 range. Although the observed percentage of dead children is undoubtedly correlated with mortality conditions, other non-mortality parameters influencing it makes it not a pure mortality measure. The other parameters needs to be taken into consideration in order to convert this proportion into the intended life table function, typically through the use of methods based on demographic models. Therefore, not only the information used is indirect, but the procedure which follows to attain it is by no means straightforward theoretically. The extent of indirectness varies greatly. So in terms of both the reliance on models, there are different models, and of the number of unwanted factors that have to be allowed for has to be considered. So the term indirect is used to describe any estimation method that depends upon models or uses consistency checks or uses conventional data in an unconventional way. Now, after understanding the meaning of indirect estimation, let us move on to discuss the need for indirect estimates of demographic indicators in detail. So, what are the needs of indirect estimations? What happened traditionally was the demographic estimation has been based on information gathered through vital registration systems and census, as we all know. So typically, a continuous registration system includes the task of documenting important life events, which includes events like marriages, divorce, births, deaths, and so on as they occur. Now, if the registration of vital events and the census counts were perfect, the demographic parameters could be calculated directly from the data reported, that is directly from the census, and there would have been no need for indirect estimation. However, what happens is that in many countries, especially the ones in the developing world, lack of comprehensive data or accurate traditional data things might be a little different and they might not be registered. The events of birth, state, or migration might not be registered. Or some population segments might not be counted in the census, or data regarding important demographic traits like age might be reported with significant inaccuracy. In these cases, indirect estimation techniques try to obtain the valid estimates of the demographic measures. To reiterate in broader terms, some of the main reasons for the use of indirect estimates can be one is the failure to record all the vital events as they occur. Like for instance, it is well known that births can remain unrecorded for a number of years. The birth is reported only when the child is ready to enter school or any other kind of organization that requires a birth certificate. Many births may never be registered in nations where a sizable section of the population has never attended school or has any connection to the official organizations that require identification certificates. Situations like these also apply to infant deaths. In this situation, parents might believe that it's pointless to register the birth or the death of a child. The vital registration system may also be deficient in recording characteristics of events such as the age of death, age of mother at the time of birth, or mother's parity after a birth. And the second reason is failure to yield perfect data. Now, censuses, a component of the traditional demographic estimation input, are far from yielding perfect data. They primarily experience two kinds of error. One is the inability to count every member of the pertinent population, although occasionally some censuses have also resulted in population overcounts and inaccurate age reporting on the part of the surveyed population. It is also common to see differential coverage of the population by sex and age. That is, young children in particular tend to be undercounted compared to the adult population, and its effects are sometimes indistinguishable from those of age misstatement. A very good example why indirect methods are implemented can be understood by the instances of child mortality. This is because, as I have mentioned earlier, population-based surveys rely mostly on the sampling methods. In some cases, the sample size in surveys may be too small to provide the precise estimates, especially when it comes to looking at rare events like child deaths. With the measures taken by the government to reduce child mortality, the instances of child death before the age of 2 have become less or rare occurrences, and thus it's difficult to estimate through direct methods. Small sample sizes can lead to higher statistical uncertainty and less reliable estimates. Thus, in these cases, indirect methods are implemented to estimate the correct figures. So after understanding what I have discussed in the first two sections, we now come to the techniques of indirect estimation. So as discussed earlier, the impossibility of obtaining some regional measures of demographic parameters directly from the traditional data sources like census, it led the demographers to develop a set of techniques that allow their indirect estimation. The development of these techniques has taken two main courses or types. So the search for methods to analyze data that have been already collected by traditional system, that is vital registration system or censuses, that is number one. And censuses are of two types, one census and double census method. One census approach provides a static snapshot of the population at a specific point of time, while on the other hand, a two census approach involves conducting two censuses at different times and they measure changes and trends in the population. Secondly, There is the search for questions that can be answered with reasonable accuracy and that provide enough information about a certain demographic phenomena to permit the indirect estimation of its level. For example, the use of information on the incidence of orphanhood to estimate adult mortality can be considered one of its examples. Because of their reliance upon special types of questions, this second type of indirect method has come to be closely associated with sample surveys. However, to obtain estimates of demographic parameters from data gathered by sample surveys, the questions tried were very straightforward queries suggested by the traditional data sources. For instance, if a birth rate was to be estimated, the number of births occurring during a given year had to be known. Hence, the question, how many births have occurred in this household during the past year, was to be asked. It was then soon realized that one could do better by asking or framing the question for each woman of childbearing age in the household as, how many children have you had during the past year, and then recording her age. With that information, age-specific fertility rates could also be estimated. Similarly, if an estimate of the death rate was required, the household's death in the year prior to the survey would be the subject of a question. If a death had occurred, calculating the age and the sex of the deceased would allow for the estimation of the central mortality rates that were specific to age and sex, allowing for the creation of a life table. So with just 2 or 3 easy questions, a comprehensive demographic profile was available. But regretfully, the survey results did not meet the anticipated results. Generally speaking, the birth rates appeared improbable and the death rates were almost always too low. The failure on the queries on death was explained by arguing that people prefer to generally forget such events and rather than discuss them with the interviewers. It was also suggested that the death of an adult member of a household could cause the household to fall apart, meaning that households that were already in place at the time of the survey were more likely to have not lost an adult member during the year prior than households that existed at some point during the year. There was also a misconception on the part of the respondent of the length of the time period being alluded to. The vague expression during the preceding year might not be interpreted by those being interviewed as exactly the 12 months preceding the interview, but instead as a longer or shorter period according to their cultural factors. Further trials with other ways of phrasing these questions have shown that their performance may be improved to some extent by making them more specific. However, the data produced by these questions remain far from perfect. So omission and recall errors are always present to varying degrees. Thus, special analytical tools are necessary for the assessment and correction of the basic data. So let us now discuss these tools which became the basis of indirect estimates for demographic data. First tool is the UN Manual X. The original idea behind Manual X was to help population specialists, mostly from developing nations, do the best assessment and the utilization of local data sources. Additionally, it was intended to act as the foundation for the comprehensive country reports that the Committee on Population and Demography and its panels would produce. This manual is considered as a useful research tool which contains the most recent techniques of demographic estimation and is suited for the analysis of incomplete or defective demographic data. This manual, however, needs to be updated accordingly. Like for instance, in several cases, methods included in the preliminary versions of the manual had to be altered. So it is also possible that some of the methods which are included in the present version will require future modifications to improve their performance. Thus, in terms of both scope and detail, this volume, that UN Manual X, cannot be considered the last word on demographic estimation. Now, the second quality of Manual X is that it is user-oriented. Emphasis has been given on the way in which estimation techniques are applied. So, elaborate examples are provided, and the prevailing trend has been to incorporate all the details in a comprehensive layout. However, there are also certain limitations of the manual. For instance, the user-oriented approach of the manual only focuses on the available techniques and it's applicable in the detailed way. But it falls short in providing the user with insights regarding how new techniques or how the alternative approaches to the available techniques can be developed. Another further limitation of the manual is that it deals mainly with the estimation of fertility and mortality in developing countries. The other demographic processes, for instance, migration, are not included here. Now, we come to the second estimation tool, and that is called the online demographic estimation tool. So, this second tool is used for both direct and indirect estimation, which helps in estimating the results from the provided demographic data. So it uses basically the secondary source data which is available in the site. And the site represents the major output arising from a joint IUSSP and UNFPA project. The material here follows in a direct line of descent from Manual X and its subsequent works, for example, the 2002 UN Manual of Adult Mortality Estimation. The principal aspect of this website is a series of web pages describing and documenting the tools and methods of demographic estimation from limited, deficient, and defective data. The methods are organized thematically for the estimation of fertility, child and adult mortality and migration rates, which are based on the data available from one census and the two census, that is double census. The indirect methods for these estimates include the indirect methods for estimating fertility rates. This indirect estimation of fertility makes use of the direct estimates of fertility derived from the summary information on the recent births, but recognizing that recent births tend to be misreported in censuses. It uses information on the lifetime fertility of younger women reported in the same census to adjust the direct estimates. Some of the methods for fertility estimation indirectly includes the BRAS-PF method. It was first set out by a person called Brass in 1964. Then second, there is the relational Gompertz model. And thirdly, there is the cohort period fertility rates. These are only some of the methods which I have mentioned. There are also other methods for, estimating the fertility rates indirectly. Then we come to the indirect methods for estimating child mortality. Indirect methods pioneered by Brass and Cole in 1968 estimate child mortality from information on the aggregate numbers of children ever born and children still alive or dead reported by women classified by age group or alternatively grouped by time since first birth or marital duration. Then we come to the indirect methods for estimating adult mortality. The indirect estimates of adult mortality can be calculated by methods depending on either one census data like Preston-Cole method, orphanhood method, sibling history method, or two census data like death distribution method. And then lastly, we have the indirect methods for estimating migration. These estimates are calculated by models like multi-exponential models and log linear models. Apart from the above mentioned tools, the sisterhood survey method, also known as the sisterhood method or survival method, is another indirect method of estimation used to estimate maternal mortality rates as well as fertility rates. It is particularly employed in settings where vital registration systems are weak or incomplete and the direct measurement of fertility and maternal mortality is challenging. The sisterhood method relies on the experience of women with their sisters to indirectly estimate maternal mortality ratios. In other words, one household can provide information of their other extended members, particularly the women, thereby covering demographic information, that is both fertility or maternal mortality rates of approximately 4 to 5 households. So, these are some of the methods used to determine population growth and changes when the direct methods fail or fall short in determining the actual data. So, after going through all the types, now we come to the limitations of indirect methods. So, as we all know that although indirect methods of demographic growth estimation can be useful in various situations, there are a number of limitations that needs to be taken into account when interpreting the results. So some of the key constraints can include error in assumptions. Like indirect methods, they often rely on assumptions about demographic parameters such as fertility rates, mortality rates, and migration pattern. Even a minimal level of change in these assumptions can lead to significant variations in the estimated demographic growth, leading to problems in calculation. Then there is fallacy in data. The accuracy of indirect estimates depend mostly on the quality of data used in the analysis. So if the input data, especially from census and surveys, is unreliable or subject to underreporting or misreporting, it can at times affect the accuracy of the indirect estimates. Then there is limited precisions. So generally speaking, indirect estimates are not as accurate as direct measurements. The estimates confidence intervals might be very large, which makes it difficult to provide accurate demographic data. Then there are non-demographic elements, non-demographic factors that affect population dynamics, like shifts in the economy or political events or natural disaster, might not be completely taken into account by indirect methods. These elements, which have an effect on population growth regardless of the demographic processes, sometimes are not accounted for. And then there are assumptions about population movement. It can be difficult to estimate migration indirectly. The intricacy of human mobility may not be adequately reflected by assumptions about migration patterns and net migration rates, particularly in areas with high rates of internal or international migration. When interpreting and applying the indirect estimates of demographic growth, researchers, decision makers, and demographers must be aware of these various limitations which have been just mentioned, and the validation against other data sources and consideration of the specific content are important steps in improving the reliability of these estimates. So with this, we have come to the end of today's video. To sum up once again, we discussed in this module, we also aim to ascertain the necessity of employing indirect measures and explore the specific benefits they aim to provide. Additionally, we delved into the various approaches through which indirect methods are put into practice. Subsequently, we examined the primary tools used for indirect estimation, and at last, we also tried to address some of the limitations which may be associated with the application of indirect estimation. Thank you, learners.